I also have the honor of introducing this morning's keynote speaker. Omer Ismail is with Enough, the project to end genocide and crimes against humanity in Washington, D.C., and in that capacity works as an advisor to agencies working in crisis management and conflict resolution in Africa, and teaches what the world constantly needs to know, learn, and act upon with regard to genocide. He was born in the Darfur region of Sudan. He spent over 20 years working both independently and with international organizations there on relief efforts and on human rights. In 1989, he fled the Sudan as a result of his political views. He then helped to found the Sudan Democratic Forum, a think tank of Sudanese intellectuals working for the advancement of democracy in Sudan. In addition, he co-founded the Darfur Peace and Development Organization to raise awareness of the crisis in his native troubled region. He was a fellow at the Kennedy School for Government at Harvard University's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, and as I said, he now is with the Enough Project. It's a real honor to be with him and to be in his classroom this morning. Omer Ismail.
It's an honor to be here with you this morning, trying to share a few of my stories in life, my very limited experience, and my more than limited knowledge, and to sit here to talk to you and with you and learn. Thank you, Professor Barrett. And thanks to everybody that is here, and a special thanks to Professor David Crane, who honored us with his presence one afternoon at the Enough Project and talked to us about his experiences. And he extended this invitation to us as the Enough Project, together with my colleague and friend, Colin Thomas Jensen, to be with you here this morning. The international law and its mechanisms, its institutions, are going through interesting times. Times of promise and also times of peril. I would like to talk about this here this morning through the experience of a Darfurian that's born and raised in that bleak region, and as a Sudanese who experienced a lot of what my fellow countrymen and women are experiencing today: deprivation and violence that is unnecessary in a country that is beautiful and colorful, a place that expands 1 million square miles. And for you who like the comparison to the geography of the United States, is larger than or equal to the area of the United States east of the Mississippi. About 40 million people, different dialects, different norms and values and belief systems, but they all call themselves Sudanese. They love that country, and they deserve better than the government of the day that they have, and they deserve to live in peace and prosperity. And we hope that you and everybody out there will help us go back to the peaceful, lovable, and wonderful Sudan. That country had been run by a government that has no consideration to human rights, that has no regard for the rule of law, that has been, since came to power in June of 1989, driving that country in the road of violence. Yes, there was violence in Sudan before this government came to power, but the people of Sudan, with their collective wisdom, tried to work hard to put it together. But if we look at the history of this regime, since it came to power in that night of June 30th of 1989, the history of bloodshed and the history of violence continued and became more and more acute. Look at the problem that they called the problem of South Sudan. It has been there since August of 1955, shortly before the independence of Sudan in January of 1956. But that was a low-level violence that could have been managed better, and the growing pains of a newly independent country let that violence continue until around 1973, when we had the Addis Ababa Accord. Then around 1983, when General Numeri, the dictator of Sudan at the time, reneged on his promises, the violence continued, and the SPLM was founded by the late Dr. John Garang. And that struggle continued until that violence ended January 9th of 2005 by the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or what is known widely as the CPA. But within this 19 years or so of the existence of this government, if we look at the history of this government, we will see the violence in the south that is spiraled out of control. And then the war in the south became, rather than an insurgency against a government in Khartoum, be it a legitimate government or not, turned into a war of religion and war of ethnicity, when the doctrine of fighting that war through the army of the government of Sudan changed to a jihadist war that is declared by the then mastermind of that regime, Hassan al-Turabi. Unfortunately, that mentality continues until today. This government, as described by the late Dr. John Garang, is too deformed to be reformed. The international community tried hard to work with it. And unfortunately, we reach a point where there are new measures that should be taken to deal with this government. The history of the use of food as a weapon of war that culminated in the starvation and the famine of Bahr al-Ghazal, that drove the now known here in this country as the Lost Boys. Thousands of them, as young as 5, and the oldest maybe as around 15. They left their villages, and in mass, they continued moving. Some of them were killed by wild animals, some of them drowned, and some of them that just collapsed. They couldn't continue. One of these Lost Boys was the bearer of the flag of the United States in the Olympics at Beijing. That was a dark history that is, unfortunately, is still continuing. The violence in Khartoum against freedom lovers and against the people who are calling for democratic transformation in the country, in what is known as the ghost houses, gross violation of human rights. Those people snatched at night, blindfolded, sent to places that are unknown, and their families will not know their whereabouts. Some of them died there under severe torture, and some of them came back broken men and women who couldn't fit back in their society. This is a violence that continued in the Nuba Mountains, where the scorched earth policy of pitting communities against each other and arming the first, or maybe the second version of the Janjaweed, because the first version was the militias that were set up in southern Sudan that killed or drove away from their homes about 2 million people in southern Sudan. The second version was the militias that were unleashed in the Nuba Mountains, creating havoc that led to the demise or the fleeing of over 500,000 people. And the perfection of that was now the last version of the Janjaweed that is established in Darfur. I'm not going to talk about the violence that happened in Darfur. You've seen the burned houses. You've seen the starving people. You've seen the pictures of the humanitarian disaster, where 3.5 million people now roaming the hills of Darfur in about 160 sites of IDPs. These are the internal displaced people. And over 250,000 that went to Chad, crossed the border, because this is the nearest next door to Sudan, where they were seeking refuge, and they are still there, 5.5 years after the crisis started in Darfur. They are warehoused in this IDP camps, and I call them warehouses because I came from that place, born and raised in the hills of Darfur, in a place that was free and beautiful, and people freely move around. Now that freedom is not there anymore. And I've seen people from my Darfur tribes driving their cattle and camels around, crisscrossing the plains into the areas where the farmers have their fields. They are living in harmony. Yes, don't get me wrong, there were problems, but there were also mechanisms to deal with these problems. There were ways and means that the wisdom of the people of Darfur had devised through the years, by which they created a system called the Judea, which is, I will give you a small example. If the camel herders, the Abbala of the north, coming south in the dry season looking for better fields and water for their animals, they will cross in the harvest season, most likely, before the harvest season ends. And there will be some skirmishes here and there. Let's assume that the young men and women left to tend for the animals, and the young men and women left to tend for the fields, because the elderly are busy going to the markets and mingling together and living their life. They leave these young men and women in charge of these assets and this, the animals. And let us assume that a few camels ventured into an area that is being cultivated and destroyed the place, and there was a clash between these people. The children would run to the marketplace, and there was some violence, there was some fighting in this place. The elderly people will come in, and they will sit under a tree. And the Ajwad, this is the person who comes, who is not related to this tribe or that tribe, from a different group that will come in, and they will sit under the tree, and they will look at the situation. And they say, there's the harvest season today, and the area that is destroyed will yield 20 sacks of grain. We'll give you $5. This is the market price today. You take $100 and go. But then one camel is killed, and maybe one of the kids was injured there, and they will say, okay, the price of that camel is $20. The kid was injured. That is like another $20. We'll give them $50. So the $100 became $50 to these people, $50 to these people. And then they will say, well, $50 is 2 camels, and here, these are the 2 camels. Most likely than not, they will kill one of the camels to celebrate. Everybody eats, and they go home happy. That is a simple way of putting it. It is a little bit more complicated than this, but you get the picture. There was a system to deal with this kind of thing until the government of Sudan came in. And they, for political reasons, in a region that is already neglected, in a region that has no investment whatsoever through the years, not just by this government, by many governments, but this government made that situation even worse, pitting tribes against each other to create this false illusion that they are not responsible for what happened. But there are many people among you here, and many people around the world know exactly what happened, and they hold the Sudanese government responsible for that. I went to Chad because for these last about 20 years, been PNG'd, a persona non grata in my own country. I cannot go back in Sudan. But I'm going around meeting the Sudanese elsewhere, and regularly went into Chad trips from the early days when these people started trekking into the refugee camps in Darfur and documenting these horrific, horrendous crimes, first-hand accounts from witnesses to this violence and people who are victims of this violence. I've never seen in my entire life and the travels that I've done around the world an isolated place like a point called Bahai, in the corner where Sudan, Libya, and Chad meet. That is a desolate, isolated place where those people 26,000 of them were put in a camp. 26,000. That is only 7 miles away from the Sudanese border. They could be attacked at any moment, and the only security that is provided to these people are 4 gendarmerie soldiers from Chad that are sitting at the gate of this camp, what is called gate, which is nothing more than 2 cones of sand marked with white stones. And they have a shack. They are sitting there. If you are coming to this camp before 6:30 in the morning, they are not there. And if you come out of the camp or coming into the camp after 6:30 at night, they are not there. And in there, you go and meet the people who tell you the horrific stories of what happened to them. A woman who is blind. Nobody can tell her age, but if you look at her with what we know from the age of people, you can tell that she is above 60, and she's blind, and she's taking care of 7 grandchildren. 7 that were orphaned by this horrific war. And then you go south to places like Greda, and you hear the same horrific stories from people who were there, and they will tell you about the morning attacks. In the morning, early, the Janjaweed will come, and they will start in the center of the town, and they start shooting and terrorizing people everywhere, so that from the center of the town, you cannot run to huddle together, but you disperse to the outside and run to where people is scattered to the 4 winds. Some of these people never saw their children or their loved ones. From the day this attack happened, they are not sure, because there is no communication, there is no way to know whether these people are living somewhere in another camp or they are dead. Or the story of the young man in the camp near Kuku in southern Chad. This young man, about 30-some years old, the attackers came in broad daylight this time. He identified some of the attackers, and he stood there and he says, "Look," and he called them by the name. "Why are you doing this? You are our neighbors. You are our people. We are together." They chased him. When he saw his fate, he started running. They ran after him. 6 of them ran after this guy, because he managed to identify like 2 or 3 of them. They were chasing him on horseback, and he's running. Then finally, just outside the village, they managed to get him. The whole gang of 6 grabbed him, wrestled him to the ground, and he is still calling on them, pleading to spare his life. 2 or 3 of them held him. One guy jumped on his chest, and he was pleading with them to spare his life. They did. After this young man sitting on his chest pulled out his knife and gouged his both eyes out of the sockets. He is now a broken man, living in the refugee camps in Kuku, dreading the fact that he's alive. These are the horrific stories, and even more and more that we documented. My project that started with the start of the Darfur Peace and Development Organization, and will continue for as long as I live, is the documentation of atrocities in Darfur. We will tell the world what this regime has done. I'm sorry. Okay. The history of bloodshed in Sudan continues with this regime. And when the world tried to address this through the ICC, a very strange and orchestrated attack from pundits and unfortunately academics and people who were enlightened, who tried to torpedo the ICC from the start, are saying this is not helpful in bringing peace to Sudan. As a Darfurian, I would like to ask this question: what peace are they talking about? 5.5 years. The World War, from where we have the legacy of this place and these wonderful people here present, ended in 5 years. The conflict of Darfur is still continuing. This is the 6th year. What peace are these people talking about? We are talking about the peace that might be brought in by what we are doing here and what the people in the ICC are doing to create leverage. We talk about the peace that the people of Darfur, if you look at them, jubilant and happy when the application to indict President Bashir was submitted. Nobody that I talk to in Sudan, and I talk to people every day, if I don't talk to them, they talk to me. I never talked to one person that told me that I'm sorry that this is happening to President Bashir and we would like to reverse this. Not a single person. Maybe I'm talking to the wrong people. But I know that I'm talking to the right people because I'm on the right side of this issue. This is what we are facing today. People around the world supporting justice and accountability. And few, very few people, I should say, they think that what we all collectively doing here and trying to find a redress to this issue, trying to find justice to the people of Darfur, very few people think that this is irrelevant because they don't like this institution and they are looking for reasons to destroy accountability. I don't know what purpose are they serving. I don't know what will happen tomorrow if this institution is undermined. The Mugabes of the world are there. The people who are running Burma are there. The dictators around the world who do not regard the life of people are there. I will give you one example. The ICC indicted 2 officials in Sudan. One of them suspected of being one of the leaders of the Janjaweed, Mr. Ali Koshib. Mr. Ahmad Haroun was the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Interior, instructed by Bashir in his famous address to them in Darfur when he said, go out there, kill and destroy. I don't want a war, a POW. I don't want anybody captured. Kill them all and come back, report to me. He was one of the people that carried that instruction. He was instrumental in doing this. When he was indicted by the ICC, what did President Bashir do? Instead of seeking ways to address this internally or externally or deliver him to the ICC, he promoted him to the full position of a Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. President Bashir chose to appoint Dracula in charge of the blood bank. President Bashir, with utter disregard to the will of the international community and to the feelings of the people of Darfur, brought Ahmad Haroun back to finish the job that he couldn't do when he was leading those Janjaweed and the military people to destroy Darfur. Now he is bringing him in to control the food, to control the access, the humanitarian access to Darfur, to control the visas of the people that are coming to help these people, to control the witnesses that are going to one day, there is no doubt in my mind, one day they are going to talk about this to the rest of the world. And they are going to expose this regime, whether it is now in power or tomorrow when it becomes part of the history books. The attack on the ICC, unfortunately, and this is the peril of it after it provided us the opportunity of this leverage and the opportunity of addressing this, the perils of this organization stem from the fact that there is a deafening silence. The people who supported this organization, the people who created it, are now afraid to come out and defend it. I'm appalled by this. There is absence of the Europeans, for example, who are the main supporters of this organization. Why are they not out there defending the ICC? Why they let the government of Sudan try to control the narrative on this issue and diplomatically defeating them? Because now this government of Sudan is trying to rally the Arab League, the African Union, the G77, the non-allied nations, everybody that they can talk to support them. And we, the people who think we created this instrument for international justice, we are hiding. This is shameful. We have to come out. We have to defend this institution. The work of these great men and women is not going to go in vain, because there are other great men and women who are taking the baton, and they are running with this thing. And there are generations of us, all of us, all the way, here and around the world, who are not going to let this happen. We are going to go out in an all-right attack against those people who are perpetrating this kind of propaganda and talk bad about this institution that we think it is one of many that are going to bring justice among the most important institutions of accountability that we have managed to create. Yes, the naysayers are going to talk about the peace process that is not going to happen, and we see it is not happening. Others are going to say this is why it demands justice, because no, all these guys that are targeted are African. As if these crimes, like the crimes of genocide and mass atrocities and crimes of this magnitude, are only African crimes. No, nobody said that. Nobody said that genocide is an African problem. Nobody said that this is only happening in the continent of Africa. I was privileged, and I don't know how much privilege I was, going around this world and talking to genocide communities. We decided to go and visit them and talk to them and say with one voice that never again should be never again. I've seen this in Cambodia. I've seen this in Bosnia. I've seen this in Armenia, where I met the first survivor of the Armenian War. He's a 97-year-old gentleman who talked passionately about this, but I was amazed because the 17, 18 years old Armenians talking even more passionately about the crime of genocide. It was amazing to me because there was no redress. The world denied them even to say there was a genocide in Armenia. That is why the younger generation now are talking about it more passionately than the old ones and the people who witnessed it. If you go and look in the eyes of these people, you will understand what crimes against humanity mean. Broken communities, men and women who cannot look you straight in the eye. The stories like this from Darfur to Bosnia to Rwanda, where I went to Kigali, I went to visit the school where 23 to 2,500 people perish in a day, hacked by machetes to death, while there were people who were supposed to protect them looking. There is a peace and justice trade-off, yes. And sometimes we know that some of these people did wrong. I was fortunate enough to be here last night and listening to Ambassador Kruger, his account of what he went through in Burundi and what he knows about what is going on in Rwanda. That was a powerful statement. And I've seen that. And he was talking about reconciliation. Yes, we want reconciliation. But for me, I want justice. Because without justice, there will be no reconciliation. Without justice, there will be no peace. The government of Sudan will sign today's copy of the New York Times if presented to it as a peace agreement, because they will never honor a peace agreement. With a regime like this, you need the leverage of the international community looking them in the eye and say, this is what you need to do if you want to avoid this. People talking about invoking Chapter 16. Yes, that could happen because we have these institutions in place and we can use them, but we have to use them right. If there is a stay of prosecution of President Bashir, should he be indicted, there should be a peace process that is working in Sudan. There should be a way of addressing this by giving this lesser perpetrators in position back to the ICC, like Kosheb and Ali and many others that will be indicted along the way. There should be a stoppage to the violence in Darfur. There should be some sort of dignified return to the people of Darfur, to their original homes. There should be some sort of restitution to make the people of Darfur feel that they belong to this country and they are treated like the citizens that they deserve. There should be a redress for the crimes against women and children as part of these crimes against humanity. But these are very important because if you look at the camps today, the IDPs or the refugee camps, you find that 85% of these are women and children. They were widowed, they were orphaned, and they were thrown to the elements out there for nothing that they have committed, except insisting on belonging to a country that doesn't want them. Unless we do this, there is no Chapter 16, and there is no reason for us even to think to open that debate. Because what we need is justice, and we have the institutions that are going to provide us that justice. People like Bashir and the perpetrators of these heinous crimes around the world should not go scot-free, not on our watch. We should be there day in, day out, asking the world, reminding them that these crimes were there, and we are not going to stand on the sidelines. Finally, the privilege of being here this morning is to have people like you with us, who guide us and give us the wisdom and give us the history and give us the lessons. And then people like you, ladies and gentlemen, who are now at the helm of providing this opportunity to people in the world to live with dignity and live in peace. And people like you, the lawyers, the academics, the journalists, the professionals around the world, you came from different places to work together and to be a constituency, to defend the oppressed and to be the voice for the voiceless. But I will close my remarks by talking to the young generation. Those people who are here in their summer course, and please go out there and tell others. This is a historic moment for you to be here with these people. Go out there and tell the rest of the world that you will not live in a world where crimes like those perpetrated in Darfur can go unpunished. 20, 30 years down the road, you will have your own children and grandchildren. They will ask you these questions. And they will say, where were you when genocide was declared in Darfur? Where were you when the ICC was trying to address these crimes and some other people are attacking the ICC? I want you to look them straight in the eye and say, I was there, and I'm proud to report to you today that I stood up and I did something about it. Thank you very much.